Dagda agus Fáilte. Hi, hello, and welcome. John O'Sullivan and Lora O'Brien from the Irish Pagan School, and we are here with our weekly, pretty much ask us anything, check in, get to know us, know who we are, know what we are. So it's not just all about the teaching and not just all about like the work that we do. Like, a big part of what we do and teach is, of course, an authentic connection to Ireland, and that's why we want to make these spaces to ask these kind of questions. Which is also fascinating. It allows us to make sure that we're also aware of what's going on in the minds of our community, which is important because we're a community-based business, and we're not going to presume anything. And it's worth asking the questions and giving honest and open answers, and that's what this is all about.
Yeah.
So
we do have a whole playlist. It's our Bookshelves and Beliefs playlist. So
yep.
Definitely go and check that out. There'll be a link at the end of the video.
But speaking of presumptions, we do actually come across a number of different presumptions.
Today's question is a bit of an awkward one for me, I have to say.
Yeah, because people presume certain things based on pieces of information that they may or may not know. So what you may or may not know is that Lora works for the ancient Irish goddess An Morrigan, or Na Morrigan, in the capacity of a priest, as a herald, as a teacher, and has done for decades. John works for the ancient Irish god An Dagda, the Dagda Mór, as a teacher and as a bard, and a priest in certain aspects. So what people understand from the lore and the mythology and the information and the relationships of our gods is the fact that they are actually in a couple. They are a wedded couple, which is made very, very clear in the stories, despite the fact that there are other relationships of the Dagda and other children born of other relationships as well. The Morrigan is his wedded partner. That's very expressly, clearly laid out in the lore and in the information. So the question we got from Adrian there is, does your relationship sometimes look like the Dagda and the Morrigans is? And we get a lot of that, unfortunately, and certain levels of presumption that go along with that. And that's why we wanted to maybe take a bit of time to chat about this question. And I suppose the first thing really is, Lora, what do you think? Does our relationship in some way, or even at some times, look like or emulate the Dagda and the Morrigan's relationship?
Well, this is something that I particularly have to be quite careful about, because very often over my career as a priest of the Morrigan, one or any or all of them have used me to speak and deliver messages. It's part of my priest work. It usually happens spontaneously. I have done ritual for it as well, where I invoke the Morrigan into myself, and I then am a channel or a voice for the god. It's not something I really want bleeding into our relationship. I mean, I can't imagine us having our weekly, financial meeting and suddenly Guthubbin, the Morrigan, is there. Nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. So
I'm entertained by the concept of it.
No, John. No.
No, I know.
No.
No.
Nobody wants that. So I would say no, because we quite deliberately kind of keep them in their own lane, right? And that is not something that would be healthy, I think, for either of us as priests, to have those elements, to give permission for those elements, those deities, to be able to just step into our relationship at any point. That is not something that either of us want. But there have been times.
All right, before we go there, right? I'm going to weigh in on that first part, if that's okay.
Yeah, go.
And we leave people in a bit of suspense about like what time, when, what. And yeah, we actually agree very clearly on that. Our spiritual relationships and our spiritual kind of connections and our spiritual occupation, as in working for these deities, is a singular kind of thing. It's my relationship with the Dagda. Lora has their own relationship with the Dagda. Lora has their relationship with the Morrigan. I have a passing friendship and casual irreverence to the Morrigan, but that's me and my relationship to that deity. And I understand, and I've written actually many stories about their relationship, and how they interact, or my perceptions of their relationship and how they interact. And so it is something I have explored for them and from my understanding of who and how they are as deities, but not in any way to emulate that or to bring that into our relationship. And I think there's another element to this question. Before we loop back to, like, times, and we won't forget that. There's an underlying kind of element of this question which causes a lot of frustration and concern in certain aspects of spirituality, and it's the concept of a binary, a sacred kind of duality of gender or sex or whatever it is, and this divine masculine, divine feminine, and trying to define
the sacred marriage
the
kind of
sacred
element.
marriage element. And like the moment you get down into this ritualistic spiritual involvement of gender or sex in some way, shape, or form, you are actually causing exclusions. So for people who don't identify with a strongly feminine or a strongly masculine, or people who identify gender fluid or queer, either which way, if you have to define your spirituality based on a binary, then you are actually creating an exclusion in that. Or if it's based on some ritual practice of sex interaction between these evoked kind of deities, individuals, then you're actually closing that door for asexual people or people who don't.
Now,
so
just on that, it doesn't mean that people who do identify strongly as masculine or feminine are excluded because everything has to be open. If you are doing that for your own personal practice, you do you. Like, nobody's saying that you can't do that. And I'm just forestalling the inevitable YouTube fuckery that would come of, you can't deny me my goddess status.
No, again, it is about, it's about a greater awareness, and it's about those kind of perspectives. And if we are conscious of it, then we can make choices about it. If we're making intentional choices about it with compassion and respect and honesty, then we're doing it right, whatever way we fucking choose to do it. Right. But if we are blinkered, blind, unaware of these things, through no fault of our own, ignorant of a bias or a preference or something, we could be inadvertently causing harm or damage. And when we talk about magical practice, we talk about all of this, it is about energy in line with your intent, in line with your will. And so if your will is not broad enough to be inclusive, then you're magically or energetically creating, unintentionally or not, an exclusion. So
you're kind of polluting your shit, really.
But maybe we can talk about magic at a different time, or
probably.
We're steering off question. But I think when we're talking about this relationship of Dagda and Morrigan, he's a very masculine deity. She is a very shapeshifter, non-binary, like, will be a fucking wolf because she wants to. Although in all the cases she does
particularly choose female forms, animal forms in the literature and the lore that we have. But there is also the idea of potential connections with Bov Jarag, who identifies, or who is identified as, a male deity as well. So
that's Bov and Bive.
Bov and Bive are interchangeable in older Irish language. But anyway, that's a topic for a different day. If you want to see a video on that, maybe I'll do something on that. Shape-shifting Morrigan.
Like, she's referred to as a she-wolf and specifically as a heifer when she goes against Cuchulainn, but it's an eel and a crow, which are non-gendered in those things. So there is that kind of aspect to these kind of queries. So I think it's worth kind of acknowledging that as part of this conversation around deities and any kind of deity worship. I'm not saying don't engage in, like, that kind of masculine, feminine energies, but I'm saying be aware of the fact that whoever needs to connect to that for their own purposes should be allowed to. If someone wants to connect to feminine deities or feminine energy and they're masculine or masculine presenting, as long as they're doing it openly, compassionately, and respectfully, no harm, no fucking foul.
Absolutely.
But if someone is like stepping into a practice, a spiritual program, a spiritual growth, and they're told, I'm sorry, because you have a penis, you can't work with goddesses, get fucked. Or because you're female presenting, you have to work with, like, it doesn't fit for me. And I think that's an aspect to this question that is worth kind of discussing when it comes to the relationships of the Dagda and the Morrigan.
Definitely.
So
I just want to as well, like, there's an element to this question before we get to where it maybe does interject, into our relationship in the everyday. There is an aspect to the Dagda and the Morrigans relationship which has sovereignty elements.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there's an interview series with Gillian Kenny. We were talking about sovereignty goddess. It may or may not be live by the time you watch this, but if you go and look for the playlist of interviews with Gillian Kenny, you will see discussion at some point on the sovereignty goddess and how the sovereignty goddess has manifested through our mythology and then through our actual history as well, and into our modern Irish identity. So we break that down, and Gillian also has a fantastic class on the sovereignty goddess. So sovereignty aspect is a whole thing in itself. And particularly in Cáthmhacht, again, there's a class on Cáthmhacht, the Second Battle of Moytura. Morgan Daimler has taught it if you want to explore that story in its totality, which is absolutely fascinating. But there is an element of that where they meet. And it's by a river, it's by a ford. He approaches her for advice, for wisdom. And that to me reads as sovereignty. That whole episode reads to me as the leader, the chief, the king coming into a sovereignty encounter. And that doesn't mean that there's no power play there. You know, they are both gods. So there's that side of things. But I think that has been echoed down through the ages, through our mythology, in different versions of the sovereignty relationship. And that's big, like that's huge, you know. And there is another kind of factor to that as well, where the one time that we see the Morrigan specifically physically maybe represented with Dáithíoch na Morrigan, the two paps of the Morrigan, is directly in relation to a monument that is associated with the Dagdas. So again, there's that kind of land shaping, possible sovereignty relationship between them.
Yeah. It's a very, very interesting passage because, like, what actually happens in that section of the story, the Dagda has actually been at a conference. He's been straight up at a conference with Nuada, Gwivnu, Dinkecht, Olma, and a couple of other heads, and it's referred to for a year, and it's the meeting of the men of the goddess is what it's actually called. And so Lugh has taken over as king in Tara, and Nuada, having stepped aside, gathers up the people he knows he needs to have a talk to, and they hash it out. What the fuck's coming down the line? Fomorians are going to be coming, and so they spend that time talking about at this meeting of the goddess, and that's what it's called. And then the first action, once that meeting is over, the Dagda goes to the Morrigan. Like, it's literally straight up after that.
He's the envoy.
Because he needs to know as much as they've discussed, as much as they have a plan, they have an idea, more information is needed. So he goes to the river luncheon to receive her prophecies about where the Fomorians are going to invade, where they're going to land. And then the next passage, he goes to the Fomorians to try and prevent the war, and ends up being the subject of abuse in too many ways.
Yeah.
But that's more stories. If you want to know my telling on that, or we ask the question, folks, that's exactly why we do this. Ask us questions, we can talk about it. But to loop it back around to the relationship, and does this sometimes our relationship look like the Dagda and the Morrigan's relationship? That is a hard thing to say because we don't really know the Dagda and the Morrigan's relationship. We have passages of the text, and then we have, you know, who they are as individuals, who they are as characters, what traits do they manifest, how do they interact. If they're not interacting with each other, because we don't have a lot of that, how do they interact with everyone else, and what does that then tell us about their interactions with each other? Or is it the fact that there isn't a whole lot of content about Dagda and Morrigan, the fact that they're a very private couple? You know, they're like, you know, okay, Grant, go off and take care of all the work you need to do, take care of all the business you need to do, but when you're on couple time, you're on fucking couple time. The both of them are just like, and the River Unchin, it says he kept a house at Glen Etchin, and ever after that first meeting, they meet there every year at Samhain. And so it's almost like we both have independent businesses, we both have a lot of work to get done, but once a year we have a couples retreat to Glen Etchin, and everyone else can get fucked because it's private couple time. You know, but again, that's a perspective. So Lora, just to loop it back, I've crossed my fingers so I wouldn't forget, times where Dagda and Morrigan stuff may have crossed over into our. I'm with you. And we talked about this very early on in our relationship. our relationship is us. The work we do for the gods is over here, and we don't bring that into our relationship, and we don't evoke and engage or any practices. Like our bed of the couple is John and Lora in that bed of the couple. Sometimes with food, sometimes with movies, most of the time with snuggles. But
TMI,
but never
John,
never never
TMI.
never deities or never anything else. That stays outside because we are human beings. We're physical beings, and the idea of living with a deity inside of you the entire time is just exhausting. I've done it. Ask me about that story another time. But yeah, times where their stuff has bled over into a relationship.
There, I think for that, you really need to look at maybe how we both are similar to attributes of those gods, because I mean, I can see where people get the notion. There are elements to our natures that could be viewed as similar to elements of these gods' natures, such as, you know, doing the work, doing the heavy lifting, tending the hearth, all of that kind of stuff. And then strategy, prophecy, change, future vision, all of that. So I guess that's where it really intersects for me. If I have to, if I'm pinned down on it, that's where it intersects for me. And there have been times where the Dagda has maybe stepped in and, looked after me through Jon, I think. And maybe there are times where the Morrigan has stepped in and poked Jon with a spear to move in the right direction. What do you think?
Yeah, I think what people need to understand and probably take on board is the fact that our spirituality and our connection with our gods is daily.
Yeah, it's very everyday. It's very
It
intertwined
is
with our,
not, I go to a special place once a month, or it's not I go work with a particular group. Like I walk and talk with the Dagda every day. That is my structure for me, because that is what works for me, and that is my spirituality and how I live it. It's also part of the agreement I made with him.
And it is our
So
living tradition. It is
absolutely,
very much a part of our culture, both nationally, but also just in our household.
yeah,
None of my kids are pagan, but like if something is going on, like my daughter will say, "Oh, pray to the Morrigan gods for me." It's like, okay.
yeah. Like your sibling is like, hey, can you light a fire for me and hold a vigil?
Yeah,
Which
yeah,
you
yeah,
did not
yeah,
so long ago.
yeah. So
So it's I think where people kind of externally looking in, like I know someone who is of the opinion that I am the Dagda manifest in this reality, and that opinion freaks me the fuck out because
it's not true.
I'm
It's like it's
no,
not
it's
true.
not. No,
No.
I am John, son of Jack and Carmel. Like I am me in all of my stuff, and I cultivate intentionally a healthy sense of ego so that I can maintain my sense of reality in this world. Despite the spiritual nudging I get on a regular basis, the spiritual downloads I get when the dad is like, "Oh, actually," and then he just pours a story into my brain, and I'm then compelled, with sometime within the next few days, to write that shit out. I was having a struggle. I'm hosting my first mentor group at the moment, Fireside Circle at the Irish Pagan School, and the people I'm mentoring asked for a meeting the Dagda journey, and I had a full on panic about it, and I'm like, I can't do that. Now Lora developed the Irish Otherworld Journeying method, so there was a lot of content already there. I was able to use Lora's method to build the safe framework for going in and out. But there's a part in the middle where I have to describe someone's interacting with the Dagda and then make space for them to experience their own thing. And I couldn't do it because I was in my own way until a couple of weeks later. I woke up out of a dream and I had dreamt the entire thing. He had literally taken me and shown me, this is what you do, this is where you take them to, this is what it looked like. And then crucially, he said, and this is where you stop talking.
You didn't tell me that bit.
So yeah, he told me this is the part where you stop talking, because he's going to be having his conversation with them. And so I woke up from that, and that morning I came downstairs and I typed it and it was done. I've since recorded it and presented it for the people, and I'm waiting to hear back. But
that's just to interject there from a like general pagan perspective. That's that's how it should be done, right?
Yeah.
Because if that's not the way of things, if people are telling you that you're the deity manifest and you fucking believe it, right? Or you start to live it, then, when somebody says, can you do a journey for me? You're not making space for that. Like you're talking about being blocked, you're talking about not being able to, right? But there is a process for that to actually happen
Yeah,
built into your relationship with the Dagda,
of
right?
course.
But if it was your ego presuming that you were quite entitled to speak for the Dagda and you knew exactly what he would say at any given moment, and the same for me with the Morrigan, like this is our process because we need to leave that space. We can't presume that our first thoughts are going to be what's correct
Yeah.
in that situation. I never presume to speak for the Morrigan. You never presume to speak for the Dagda. What we do is we leave the space and we get the messages. And that's how it happens,
Yeah.
So,
And then when we receive the messages, we sit with that fucking message. We interrogate it, we question it, we bend it back which way and forward, and we find out what is the meaning of that by referencing the lore, by referencing our experience. We don't run off and just start dumping that message on other people's doorsteps.
sometimes the
Which
Morrigan has a
has
little bit more
okay,
urgency
yeah,
than that. Just on
yes,
occasion, I will point that
that's
out.
fair. That is
It's
100%
a
Morrigan
direct
stuff.
to the point, there has been a couple of times where it's like, this has to happen and it has to happen now. This is the time,
Yeah, but in all those instances where that has happened for you, it's because the other individual who's supposed to be receiving this message has already made space for an understanding
That's
that you're
true.
speaking on behalf of her.
And
And
also,
so,
I have a very, very long history and relationship with the Morrigans. So, on a daily basis. So, like 20 years of practice,
yeah,
actual
yeah,
practice with this has given me a few shortcuts, maybe,
yeah, but
or given her a few shortcuts, really.
and if she's stepping in to use your
Yeah.
voice or your perspective on stuff, like I remember specifically waking up in the morning, and it was in the mid. Well, it wasn't even in the morning; it was in the middle of the fucking night. And there's you on your phone, and I'm like, "What are you doing on your phone at this time?" It was like 3 a.m. or something, and you're like, "Yeah, I just woke up with a message for somebody, and I had to send it now." She woke me up out of this dream to send that message. But the person had already built that relationship
Yeah, it's
with you,
true.
was
Yeah.
already someone that, you were mentoring in a priestly capacity. And so when they received that message, they knew it wasn't Lora texting me at 3 a.m. in the
Absolutely. Yeah.
morning. It
Yeah.
was like,
Yeah.
oh shit, here's something that I was pretty much expecting to be receiving anyway.
Yeah. There is that trust built up.
So, but again, it is about, and even then, you woke up and you sat with it for a while, and like before you even typed it out, you were saying,
Oh,
this
there's
has to be
always,
sent,
yeah, no, there's always double checks.
you
Yeah.
know?
There's never a point where, okay, I won't say never, once or twice. Again, I'm doing this for 20 years, right? But it would be very, very unusual for me to be completely out of control or
Yeah,
like to be completely taken over. It has happened very rare occasions. But again, that would be when I'm physically in the cave or, like there's more happening or more going on that kind of leads to that being okay,
yeah.
and safe for me and part of our contract and part of our relationship. But like, that's not something that would be happening to somebody who's been studying this for a year or 5 years or has been building relationship, you know.
Yeah, these things take
Yeah.
time, and like
Yeah.
that's why we're not selling a quick fix. We're not selling a send us your subscription, buy this magic crystal, and suddenly you're enlightened.
You're
Like,
initiated.
no, fuck no. What we're doing is, hi, yeah, welcome to the Irish Pagan School. Get to work.
Yes.
I think someone actually put a comment not so long ago in a video that they watched about. It was like someone expecting to come across a Laura O'Brien video and not get homework. You don't know who you're talking to. And I was like, yeah, absolutely. So,
Yeah, but that's because we're not selling the complete package of like the one true way
oh, fuck no.
TM,
No, fuck no.
what we do is we give people the tools and the resources
To
to
do it
build their own
themselves.
relationships. We give them the authentic source material. We give them our opinion and our direction and our guidance because we've been doing this for a fucking long
And
time.
it's what they're coming to us to seek.
Right. But ultimately, it is up to every single individual to do the work and to develop these relationships. And the other side of this question, to bring it back to the question, is if we were embodying the Dagda and the Morrigan in everyday life, in our relationship or anywhere else, where the fuck does that leave anybody else? Like, that's not what we want. We don't want a monopoly on this. We don't want to be the one true way or the one true voice or anything like that. That is absolutely not something I have capacity to have responsibility for.
Fuck no.
I'm burnt out.
That's how you start a cult.
Yeah.
And no, we're not starting a cult, and there is no cult stuff. But again, it's also, you make a good point. If someone's flagging or raising that thing of like, I am the voice of the Morrigan, or I'm the voice of the Dagda, out of nowhere or whatever, then it's a cult of personality. Like,
absolutely.
Or the person is experiencing some kind of emotional, spiritual, or mental trauma or challenge or growth sequence that they're not balancing very well or very healthily as a human being with a healthy level of ego. So anyway, we've come across those in our time. But to drag it back to the question, like, sometimes like a Dagda and Morrigan is our relationship sometimes like theirs. And I don't think it's our relationship is sometimes like theirs. It's the fact that we work for them and with them so strongly that there is an interaction. There is a pretty common level of traits and awareness. And so it's not that we are manifesting them, it's just that we are so similar to them in some aspects, which is why they chose us to fucking work for them.
Because we were a good fit.
Yeah, the Dagda's not going to choose an inhospitable bastard to kind of work for him. He's going to choose someone who has that hospitality basis, or he's not going to choose someone who, has no creativity, no soul to them, no welcome to them. He's going to choose someone that fits for him. And that's usually how these things come about. So, yeah, to be honest, to drag it right the way back, does our relationship sometimes look like their relationship? Yes and no. But we're very conscious of where our relationship is between Lora and Jon, not the Morrigan and the Dagda.
So
as ever,
leave it there.
It's never easy, but it's always entertaining. And thank you very, very much for the question. Thanks. I really appreciate it. And as you've seen, folks, you present us with any question at all, no matter how small, we can talk at it, and hopefully in an educational and an invitational way.
Absolutely. And because people keep talking about our t-shirts and our hoodies and all the rest of it, this is one of my favorites. I just want to sip coffee and read Mythology. And we have our Irish Pagan School mug. I don't know if you can see that. But
it's all shiny.
All of that is available on eelandotter.net, the link below, merch. And we have the playlist, so feel free to watch the other chats that we have here in our Bookshelves and Beliefs playlist.
And podcast. Ask us the question.
Yeah, ask the question. And make sure that you check out all the free resources and all that good stuff, links below. So thanks for the questions, and we'll see you next week.
Slán.